I like you.
What are you, 5? I once read that maraschino cherries stay in your stomach for like 7 years. Or cause cancer, I forget which. Terrible. I'm sorry. I thought you were a crypto bro.
You thought I was a crypto
No.
bro?
Yeah, no, I don't know, like a really expensive prostitute.
I'm not a relationship person.
Yeah, I
Never been
gathered
good at
that.
that.
Well, how do you know? You've never tried having a relationship or carbs. How do you know it doesn't
Carbs?
work
I
for
never
you?
said it.
Come on, you don't look like a reckless snacker.
Well, thank you.
Hey friends, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel. There's a large conversation online about the movie It Ends With Us. And a lot of you in my comments have been asking about whether or not this movie was any good. Because some of you that are in this story, that are invested in the story, haven't even seen the film and are just really interested because it involves Hollywood elite people that are, for all intents and purposes, fighting over a film. And for some of us, it seems impossible to connect with the amount of wealth and affluence these people have and some of the issues that they're fighting over, but also can recognize the dynamics at play, the controversial fight that they're having over, was it sexual harassment? Was it not? Fights over creative direction, film cuts, all of those things. And one thing that we really haven't talked about was the critical response to the film and how this actually played a role in why she got Blake Lively, why she got backlash. So I haven't really dove into what the critics said about the film and how the film's release is kind of the starting point of a lot of this backlash. And so for Miss Blake Lively, she wants people to believe that there's like this digital campaign that happened and they manipulated the socials, and she's provided these text messages from Jen Abel and Melissa Nathan to claim that there's a social combat going on. But at the heart of the story is there was a film release and there was a film premiere, and that created a lot of chatter. It created chatter on TikTok, it created chatter on Twitter and on Reddit, Facebook, and then Colleen Hoover had a whole group where they talked about it.
All this It Ends With Us movie promo is literally making me sick. All this promo is just so unserious for a very, very serious topic.
And it is not the movie for you to don your florals, grab your besties, and go in for a cute little rom-com, okay? Like, take it seriously. This is not a lighthearted movie.
If Justin Baldoni is not the person who he says he is, with all of the charities that he's been involved with, his podcast, and his delicate approach to bringing this hard and difficult story to life, I mean, he's the only one in this press tour who has been putting the spotlight on the real dangers of domestic violence. Come on, you're telling me that the guy that did this interview aren't messing with him?
It's too real, and there are too many people that are the real life Lily Blooms of the world that have to deal with that every single day.
I do kind of feel like the press for it though is a bit like, I don't want to say tone deaf, right? But I just feel like I've watched a lot of interviews and stuff, they're not really touching on the domestic violence part, and it makes me worried that people who have went through that will watch this film and don't know that it's about domestic violence, because apparently it doesn't have any trigger warnings at the start, and it probably should.
Does anybody else feel like the trailers, the press, the overall vibe, It Ends With Us, is giving flowers and happiness and chick flick, romantic comedy, everything that this movie is probably not going to be about?
And then it was also in the media because everyone was at the premiere. Clips of the premiere were shown. They were promoting the film. There was tons of interviews coming out. And then on top of that, as the film starts being seen by people, then people online are able to share their opinions. And so the film itself wasn't very well received. I would call it mixed reviews. The film was a hot mess. And there was a lot of critical reviews by some pretty major outlets. And there were some specific issues that some of these outlets had with the way that DV was portrayed in the film, the choices in editing, choices around music, the overall pacing of the film, the structure of the film, and the development of the stories and how DV was portrayed. And going into this premiere, this film was either going to do one of two things. It was either going to be wildly successful because Colleen Hoover's book was wildly successful, but her book was marred with controversy too, because the book itself had been, while a lot of people were reading it, there was a ton of backlash around it because of the way that it handled the topic of domestic violence and what for many people viewed as her Colleen Hoover's shameless promotion of it. You know, about a year before the film came out, she decided that she was going to promote an adult coloring book called It Ends With Us. So, part of the promotional problem with this film was that it wasn't a romantic comedy, and the book itself wasn't a comedic book. It was a dramatic thriller slash romance novel about domestic violence, and it fit zero genres. But for all intents and purposes, it would have been challenging to market no matter how the film was made. But the critical reception of the film played a pretty significant role in the online conversation about the criticism that was given to Blake Lively. So, on the one hand, Blake Lively wants people to believe that she was only getting criticized because of this digital social media manipulation. But critics that were writing for major outlets had their own criticism that wasn't being influenced by social media opinion. I want to just give you a couple examples of how this was received in the mainstream because the Hollywood Reporter, that generally has been, pretty neutral on this topic, actually called this is what they wrote on August 20th. Their headline was It Ends With Us should have warned audiences ahead of time. Movies should learn from TV shows and do a better job of alerting audiences when a project contains sensitive content. And this was written as sort of an op-ed by an executive director of the network of victim recoveries of DC. So advocates that work with victims of domestic violence started to chime in about how the film lacked trigger warnings and that when the film started and the way that it was promoted actually was really confusing to audiences because some people who hadn't read the book had no idea that the story was actually about a DV relationship. And this is how they criticized it by glossing over its domestic violence content in the film's marketing and by not providing any content warnings prior to the start of the film. It Ends With Us ultimately fails the survivors it is supposed to advocate for. The biggest criticism that this article stated from this expert that works with victims was that there was no trigger warning at the beginning, no services offered, and there was no resources given to victims if they were being impacted by the film. And then the way that it was marketed didn't let audiences know what the film was actually about, which could cause a further traumatic experience to someone if they were going in this thinking it's a rom-com. So it was about sort of the responsibility of filmmakers and studios to not mislead audiences. Okay, that's from an expert in DV. And so this concept that Blake was being dogpiled on social media and somehow that's influencing all of these major outlets to have this criticism is ludicrous. Yes, there could have been a social combat. I don't believe there was, but there could have been. And if there was, that still doesn't influence someone who is a expert and works with victims from having this opinion. Okay. There was another one in the Associated Press. Okay. The Associated Press is the largest news organization that is picked up by more news agencies in the United States. Okay. And their review of this film was very disastrous for the film, very critical. The individual that reviewed the film, Mark Kennedy, was extremely unhappy with the overall film. Okay. So, for an example, it says that the film tries to balance the realities of DV inside of a rom-com and and a female empowerment movie, and all suffer in the process. It veers too close to melodrama with unaliving, homelessness, generational trauma, child unaliving, unintended pregnancy, and never forgotten love, all touched on and only half digested. There were so many weaved concepts in this film that he's right. It was a very hollow story. There was no depth underneath the story plots. There are red flags about Ryle, but they aren't obvious until they're strung together, which literally takes years. Credit to the filmmakers for not making the potential abuser so easy to wave a red flag about. So, another criticism was it took too long to get to the point where you finally realize that he's not a good guy, because it's claiming in the beginning, it's kind of like showing him as a rom-com, like love interest. And her dynamic with Ryle and with Atlas in the book is very different than in the film. And the book's trying to portray it as a love triangle, and it wasn't in that book. It wasn't a love triangle. It wasn't even about that. Yes, Ryle was jealous, but it wasn't a love triangle. The review said the most powerful thing about It Ends With Us is the after effects of DV and how they unmoor those who witness or survive it. This could have been tightened and highlighted more. Baldoni perfectly balances menace and seduction, operating in the zone between assertive and psychotic. And his direction is good, with an ability to summarize scenes quickly and move the plot elegantly. He does have a fondness for too many music-led montages. So the criticism here is that the music-led montages were not appreciated. And who did the music for the film? Not him. So that's actually not his creative direction. That was Blake's. And the other criticism that it was a rom-com was not a creative direction of his, it was Blake's. So you're the director, and because your name's on the film as the director, even though you didn't put the film together, she did, and she made it into a rom-com after she joined. It ends up with him getting the critique that it's too many music montages, it's too long of a movie, it doesn't have good pacing, and it shouldn't be a rom-com, okay? Now listen to how they review her. Lively is fine here, veering dangerously close to manic pixie dream girl with her cute flower sketches and love of shabby chic, but perks up at the end. She wears a lot of rings and a lot of flowers, but can also stun a room in a cutout dress. The script by Christy Hall has some terrible clunkers. The man runs through women like candy. That's a line by Alyssa that Alyssa says to Lily about her brother Ryle, but nicely maneuvers around the book's weird spots, like making Lily's dad's funeral a flashback instead of an odd recreation on the rooftop. And it says, but It Ends With Us doesn't end quickly enough. More than 2 hours drag with tangents and poor editing, like sudden scenes cut that leave viewers looking for clues to where they are. This was something that I found very challenging for me watching the film, was that there were scenes in it that felt like I was watching a rom-com from the 1990s, and where they're singing karaoke and they're drinking and they're dancing and they're doing all these things, and you're supposed to get the sense that like this love story is building, and it comes off incredibly cheesy. And then there's other moments where scenes are so disjointed where you're like, wait a minute, you guys were just kissing and now he hit you, but we don't know that he hit you. Like the DV scenes are very hard to understand when you're watching it. It's really confusing for the viewer. And then you don't find out until the end of the film that it was actually not accidental. And so you're like thinking that they got into an accidental, like their bodies crossing paths, which can sometimes happen. And then you find out, no, he's actually been violent with her. And it feels like the rug was pulled out from under you. And it feels really callous and empty, because in the book, it's not handled that way. And they cut out Lily's agency and understanding what was going on with her. They cut out the steps that Ryle took to get help for himself and the plans they made to try to curtail the behavior. And so for audience members, it makes you feel like the woman doesn't see the red flags, but she does in the book. And then he went on to say so many questions, like how Lively's character got onto the roof of a luxury high rise. Why is Jenny Slate's character wearing Valentino and carrying a really expensive purse? And why is she working in a retail job? Why is Lily obsessed with the Carhartt stuff? And it says The movie's adoration of wealth and luxury, from a Mercedes to $1 million apartment and fancy dinner reservations, I guess, are attempts to show that domestic violence isn't confined to sports bars and factories. And it says, what's funny is that Lily clearly has a type. Both our paramours are dark-haired, buff dudes who favor tight black t-shirts, have stubble beards, and adore her when they fight, and they do. It's actually hard to tell them apart. And then they end it by, when Lily and Ryle finally hook up for the first time, she warns him, don't let me regret this. She will, of course, and a few others who are part of this film probably will too. So it wasn't a good, that's not a positive review. He's basically saying that you should forget the movie because it's a cliche built on a cliche, built on a rom-com, built on, there's a lack of depth to the characters, to the storylines, and there's too much chaotic storyline happening, and the storylines don't tie up and have a beginning, middle, and end like Lively claimed. But his key issues were around the sloppy editing, music, and the length, all of which were controlled by who? Blake. So her film itself wasn't getting the best reception. There was another critical review from another website, and this is from Pajiba. So Pajiba, which is a film, television, and movie review site, they did a review on her film and they called it a tonal mess. So the tone of the topic and the seriousness of the topic and how it was handled wasn't handled well. This is a review that was done on August 12th after they saw the film. Okay. This is extremely important. If you looked at, this is what they write. If you looked at the marketing for this film and thought it was a rom-com, I wouldn't blame you. The obfuscation of its plot, that a woman is falling into a relationship where her life is at stake, is indicative both of the book's issues and the film's inability to overcome them. So half of the problem with the movie itself is because the book is a mess. It wants to be hot and spicy, but also have comedic elements, including the funny in-laws. It wants to examine something heart-wrenching, but also have a subplot about a long-lost adolescent love. It's not impossible to juggle these myriad of ideas. Done well, it would reflect the dizzying nature of an abusive relationship where things can flip from fine to not within a drop of a hat. But here, as with the book, it's a mosaic of ill-fitting tonal dissonances that make the comedic bits unfunny and dramatic bits frivolous. So their opinion isn't very good of this film, right? And this is not by some commentator online. This is a film critic. And this is how they critiqued Lively's performance. Lively does herself no favors here either. She's a perfectly serviceable actress who can often be very good with the right material, such as Rich Lady Soapy Goodness of A Simple Favor. Here, there are moments where she shines, especially whenever Lily tries to hide an evident fear with a rictus smile. Mostly, however, she flounders. But the material is largely what's dragging her down. The material that she rewrote. Stripped down to her core, Lily's entire characterization is one of a barely sketched out woman with a lot of pain. Things happen to her, but there's no sense of any internal life beyond that. This is the book's fault too. Hoover's heroines are almost always like this, and they're usually as stupidly named too. More screens for readers to project themselves onto the figures of their own existence. Baldoni does better, largely because the book and screenplay seem far more concerned with the abuser's emotional arc than his victims, which is Hoover's trademark. So one of her criticisms was that he was doing this through the wasn't looking at it through the female gaze, and she needed to be the female gaze, Blake. The problem is that in the book, Colleen Hoover developed Ryle and made him and romanticized Ryle so that you wanted to be with him. And she made him likable. He has the uncanny charm of a troubled man who thinks violence is the answer to everything, even if the conclusion to the entire story is conveniently neat and doesn't do that arc justice. It's also a problem that he's much more interesting to watch than the other guy, Brandon Sklenar, who plays Atlas. Brandon's performance was so flat. I was not a fan. This is one of their final takeaways. One wonders if anyone involved with It Ends With Us, including the author, was truly focused on depicting the domestic abuse with empathy and proportion. Baldoni makes for some good moments where the camera lingers on Lively's face after she's been struck and the whole world suddenly changes for us. Such scenes, however, are few and far between, and a lot of the film's aesthetic leans harder on perfume ad than indie drama. The film seems more preoccupied with sexy scenes or building a love triangle. Lily's mother, played by Amy Morton, is largely ignored, meaning the entire theme of the abuse being a cycle that engulfs families is weakened as a result. What is sacrificed in favor of it? This is a 130-minute film, and you couldn't cut out some of the bad banter to make room for such a crucial detail. So she was the one that added all that banter to the script because she wanted it to be funnier. So when you start to look at a lot of the criticisms of the film itself, it's a lot of what she did. The editing, the music choices, the bantering that didn't make sense, trying to make it a rom-com, the way that it was marketed, these were all of her creative choices. Those were not Justin's creative choices. And then finally, they say it ends with us ends up being frivolous because its source material is. It's part of an industrial complex where a story of abuse is written and marketed as spicy, and where the author can do coloring books and nail polishes tie in merch. The roots of an honest story are here, but misguided decisions smother them at every turn. Misguided decisions. Okay, this is again an independent film critic that isn't a paid bot for Justin Baldoni. So when you start to look at the actual criticisms of the film critics, they mirror what the critics in the audience were saying that were actually the people that went that didn't like the film. So if you have film critics that are sort of, this is their impression and they're the ones getting paid to review it and letting you know if you should go see it, and then those that are going to see it come away with the same opinion, how is Jed Wallace and Jen Abel and Melissa Nathan trying to convince people to push a public narrative that you shouldn't enjoy, you should not be mad about the way it's marketed, you shouldn't have questions about what was going on with the marketing and why Justin wasn't around, or is there a feud happening? Here's the thing. If the film would have been better, if the subject matter would have been handled with better care, if the marketing would have been handled with better care, if the editing and the music and the final product met the expectations for those that were going to see the film, the criticism like this wouldn't have existed online. But there was so many holes in the story and subplots, and the film itself wasn't very well put together. And then the story wasn't handled respectfully. So when the film itself starts getting criticized, to me, what it seems like happens is the deflection moves away from the film issues to it's a fight between Lively and Baldoni, and then they are going at it, which is really ultimately the creative fight continuing post-production. Lively's wanting to frame it like he's a predator and it was a troubled production and that's why this film sucks. And then he's trying to say it's about a fight over film direction. But if the trouble with the film itself didn't exist, no one would have had the questions or criticisms to begin with. Okay? The criticisms didn't come out of thin air. They weren't made up. They weren't a bot army. The average person going to the film could walk away with a similar viewpoint. There was dozens of TikTok people talking about it, hundreds. There was dozens and dozens of videos about the issues with the film. The film was also widely successful financially, so it was a huge story. And rather than focusing on the film itself, that criticism started to permeate all aspects of the story. And the heart of it is that the movie just wasn't very well made. It wasn't a very good movie. People had very mixed feelings about it. Critics really felt like it missed a lot of marks and missed a lot of key issues and lacked substance. And then the massive elephant in the room is just the way that it handled the story of a victim of domestic violence and the lack of care or concern to the survivors that would be watching the story and their experience with the film via how it was marketed. That all exists because of the way the whole entire project came together and the way that Blake's hands were all over it. But if you were to even remove Blake from the situation and remove Justin, this movie was going to fail critically, no matter what, because the book itself is the problem. Hoover's characters are problematic. The way she handles abusers is problematic. Lily's story is problematic. Lily never goes to the police. She never files a report. She makes people think that joint custody is standard when DV's involved. There's just a lack of anything to do with therapy and getting help and resources. And so that's not the average experience for someone leaving. And then there's also this key part about how dangerous it is for women that do leave. So the film itself was going to get a mixed review, regardless of who directed it, who starred in it, and who produced it, because of who the book was authored by. If you want to go to the core of the controversy, you have to go to the content itself and who wrote that book, and it's Colleen. And it was her choice to write the story this way. And as compelling as Justin thinks the story is and views the story as impactful to him, a lot of people that have read the book don't feel that way, you know? And so I think as the growing disconnect and the anger at Colleen Hoover was amplifying in the years that they were producing this film, the environment that this film was released into was not a happy one. It was pretty hostile. There was ongoing Colleen Hoover's being canceled videos constantly on TikTok. There's lots of people that do not like her. And that itself is going to cause immense backlash. And then all of the changes to the book are going to cause backlash. And then the way the characters portray it are going to cause backlash. And then how it's handled is going to cause backlash. So this was a film that was going to be mired in controversy no matter how it was made. And Lively made a choice to take over all of this and make it her own. And I found some more footage of her at the pre-screening just to show to you how much authorship she took of this, to show you how many of these criticisms are hers to own and nobody else's. And this is part of the job you have when you become the quote unquote director, even though you weren't, is you own the success and the failures and the criticisms of the film.
Yeah, just know, like, you're gonna have to forgive some things. You'll see, like, some, like, maybe tape on the walls and, like, music that's gonna, you know, the score is not done, things that'll, like, you know, tweak and change. But by and large, it's the movie you'll see. But please go see it again August 9th, because it'll be even better. And we're nervous for you to see it today, but also just so excited, because I feel like I can trust that you guys know that it's not totally done, but you'll still really love it, and we hope you do.
Done yet. It's almost done, but...
You haven't seen the movie. What are you talking about? He literally hasn't seen the movie.
I haven't seen anything, so...
That was good. Tell him more, though. Tell him more about the movie.
I think it's 2 hours long.
And it's not done. Like, the score isn't done. There's, like, tape on the wall and some scenes that are, like...
You can see my wig and coming off and starting coming off. It's my wig.
Yeah.
Pins, there's some pins that we gotta get out of there.
Yeah. Honestly.
It's the whole thing.
But like it was before his Brazilian butt lift too, so like it's a little different. We have to show.
I just couldn't fit it in. I just couldn't fit it in before the film.
Anyway, we're excited for you guys to see it. It's not done, but it's close enough. On August 9th, you guys will see it, and I hope you guys, they were like, don't show them the movie, it's not done. I was like, they'll understand. We're just excited to share it. I'm so excited that you guys are watching this movie. You guys are genuinely like the first people to see this movie. It's not done yet. That wasn't a joke. We weren't supposed to show you. Also not a joke. They were begging us all month, all week not to show you guys this movie because it's not totally done. So when you see it August 9th, you know, music, the score will be done, the tape's gonna be off the walls, the hollow heart's gonna be correct.
So in June, Lively admitted to like 2,500 fans of Colleen Hoover that went to the screening as a part of Book Bonanza on June 16th that it's her film. It hasn't been completely edited yet. They're going to have to use CGI to fix some scenes. She was really obsessed during this press tour with Brandon's butt, and she made him show off his butt in every single theater that they went into, and it was shown across multiple theaters to be able to satisfy all the number of fans that were viewing it at the same time. And she was owning that it would be better. She would have everything fixed. The music would be better. The tape would be off the walls. And she acknowledged that the studio and her were fighting about her showing this to the audience without it being finished. So she showed an incomplete version of a film to 2,500 people took ownership for the editing, the music, and all of it. And so when the film is released and the criticism is the editing is sloppy, the music is not great, the montages, the romance montages with music are awful, the criticism around the length of the film, the cuts and the lack of storylines ending, and the quick cuts between scenes without any transition, that's all her. That's criticism that if you're going to be the director, producer, and the PGA of this film and steal it from him, that's the criticism she should be owning herself, because she's there saying it's her film. So if it's her film, all of these critics that are professional movie critics and paid journalists that are critiquing this, and she's not impressing them, it's her criticism to own. And so now she wants us to believe that this criticism is manufactured by Justin because he's retaliating against her for sexual harassment. Justin has no incentive to trash her online, by the way, because if he does, it hurts the bottom line for his film. Even though he didn't do the final edit, it's still financed by his studio. So he's not going to, what incentive does he have to start this kind of criticism about her online? Zero. Got to think logically. No diving into conspiracies, just look at the facts. And this is where it landed to me today. So, what were your thoughts of the film? Did you watch the film? Were you a Colleen Hoover fan before or after? Would you buy another one of her books, read another one of her books? Will you see her new adaptation knowing how badly this one went? And what are your thoughts about how this isn't necessarily about a bot farm or a social combat, but rather actual critiques about a poorly made film? Tell me what your thoughts are in the comments below. Let's get to those 60% of you that haven't yet subscribed to hit that subscribe button on the way out, and make sure to sound off so I can comment back to you. And thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.